Hi and welcome to another incubation Q&A, incubation talk. I'm here with Paul van der Made and Brian Bors. And we're going to talk about accessibility today. So first of all, let's do a round of introductions. Brian, can you please introduce yourself shortly?
Yeah, I'm Brian Bors. I studied game design and development at the HKU, the Hogeschool voor Kunst Utrecht. And after that, I took one look at the game industry and I was like, this is way too stressful for me. I want to do something else with my life. And I remembered my internship at the Accessibility Foundation. And there I was working on game accessibility. I was researching how to make games accessible. I was talking to people about that. And I started working for those guys.
Okay.
And now I mainly make websites accessible, but from time to time I still talk about and do things with game accessibility.
All right. We'll ask you a little bit more about the Stichting Accessibility later. But secondly, Paul, can you introduce yourself shortly?
I'm Paul van der Made. 5 years ago, I worked as a communication manager at Column Master. But after that point, I had a cerebral haemorrhage. That's the word.
Cerebral haemorrhage. Yes.
Thank you. And therefore, I at that point had like 4 disabilities. One, walking is a bit harder. Also, my right hand doesn't work anymore. Also, I can't only see the left side, so right side I can't see that. So normally if you talk with this, I don't see all these people. So
that's good.
Yeah, and the last option is disabilities for aphasia. So yeah, it's hard to have to learn to talk and words in the beginning at first time.
Yeah.
So now the Dutch is fine. Sometimes I can't find the right word, and like the best quiz master ever. I can talk around that word, and then so that's when after that I can make the sentence after. So you know the thing is that normal work is no option anymore, especially for the communication.
Yeah.
But therefore, gaming was always my hobby, and also with my work, especially the e-sport and the gaming, and therefore that was. Well, first I was learning game personally, and I was like, okay, there are so many young people with a disability, and a lot of those young people have first the hobby. They have lower hobbies, like gaming. It's harder or it's not standard actually, but also they have a lower chance they have more friends. Because you get new friends from your school, work, that kind of stuff, and at a cafe, the bar. But those people have lower of those connections in that way. So and therefore, with the foundation, I'm focusing for those young people that they have an option, or actually there are options for these young people for new games, and also games these days is just social. And when I was a small kid, you're like a nerd, and now you're a nerd and not gaming. Yeah. So that's switched in this time. So that's why it's
okay. And the foundation is called HiPerks.
Yes.
Okay. We'll talk to you later and about HiPerks. Brian, first of all, Stichting Accessibility.
Yes.
What is that and what do they do?
So we're an expertise center for accessible ICT in general, and so gaming is a small part of what we do, and we mainly consult people on how to make their software and sometimes even hardware installations accessible for people with all sorts of handicaps.
Yes, because accessibility can mean a lot of different things.
Yes,
I guess. So for when you help on a website, what are the problems or the accessibility problems that you usually try to fix first?
So on a website, websites are meant to convey information to the user 9 out of 10 times. So we make sure that all the information on the website is in theory accessible for everybody that can use a computer. So blind people, deaf people, people with specific cognitive disabilities and people that have motor function losses and such. The second part is a website sometimes is interactive. So we make sure that the website is operable for everybody. Even if they can't use the mouse because they're blind and can't see the cursor, people should still be able to access all the functionality on the website.
And what would what would solutions be? Can you give a few examples?
So, for instance, completely blind users have the most issues, of course, because websites and games are a very visual medium. All of the output the website gives you is through the screen, or almost all of the output. So a text on the website can be read out loud to them via their own software. Most blind users have their own screen reading software that reads the screen. But if they then encounter an image, like the Queen waving on a website, they don't know what that image is. It's not read out loud to them. So in the code of a website, you then define an alternative text. You state, hey, this is a photo of the Queen waving, and then that alternative text is read out loud to them, to the blind user, instead of that image.
And with interactive websites,
yes.
Or the next level would be games.
Yes.
You of course get a host of new problems.
Definitely.
So what are the first, what are your personal feelings about accessibility in games right now?
It's getting better.
Yeah?
Yeah. And in some parts it's getting worse.
Okay.
What's getting better is that for instance, subtitles is becoming a standard. Like Half-Life were the first people that have like subtitles for their entire game. One of the first games that had subtitles for their entire game, and from that point onward, it was in their engine subtitles, and they could simply say if a sound file is played, you should also play this in this subtitle. Then deaf gamers are also warned about that enemy that's coming around the corner because you can hear their footsteps, for instance. And they can follow the story, which is arguably even more important than hearing footsteps. So that's becoming an industry standard, and the next thing we're now seeing is colorblind modes. Colorblind modes are also slowly starting to get incorporated in more and more games. And now with subtitles, it's now also sort of switched. If you don't have subtitles, people will complain nowadays because they're used to them. So this is the sort of thing we're trying to do. We're trying to spoil the users so that they will complain if the accessibility features aren't there.
I think most people here might not even realize that it's an accessibility feature.
Sure.
They would just it's just a feature that you have in a game so everybody can enjoy it, or
Yeah. 80% of the times that subtitles are used, it's not used because people are hard of hearing.
No, exactly. So that would be a success story
Definitely.
for you
When
it's not thought of as a specific tool for accessibility, but as something that belongs in any game.
Yes.
Right. And of course, colorblind is more and more common right now, but still not standard.
Yes.
Right.
Definitely.
We talked a little bit before we had this Q&A, and we talked about your definition of a game, which might be interesting.
Yeah. So there's a lot of definitions of games out there. But one of the definitions I tend to use in light of game accessibility is a game is an activity that tests a specific out-of-character skill of the player. So if, for instance, you have a first-person shooter, one of the skills you are testing is hand-eye coordination and tactical battlefield placement of your own body. So if you're testing hand-eye coordination, then a blind user would reliably fail that test. And that's a good thing. I mean, it means that the test is accurate. You're actually challenging the player on a specific thing, and a blind user can never finish that specific test. But a lot of games incorporate what I tend to call false skill challenges. you're not actually trying to test the player on that. For instance, navigating a menu is not something that you're trying to test the user with. They're not supposed to grapple with it. But if they are grappling with it, then it's a false skill challenge, and you're testing, for instance, if a user is colorblind and an enemy runs around the corner, you're not testing, and that enemy has for that specific user has the same color as the background. They're not seeing the enemy, and a regular player that isn't colorblind would see that enemy. So that's also a false skill challenge, because you want the player to see the enemy. He just needs to react quickly. That's the true skill challenge. So within that definition, you would then add a different game, mainly a different skill challenge that you're not even trying to add. And if you think about it like that, then you get to the real fundamental question of what am I actually testing the player on, and aren't I testing more than I want to test?
Yeah, and also maybe if you go look at your own game and see what kind of skill challenges you're setting up for the player. Yeah. Can I be more accessible?
Sure.
With this skill challenge that I'm trying to, or do I need to be?
Yes.
Because of course you can't always please everyone, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Or am I wrong?
No. So in theory you could.
Yeah.
There's a different solution. You can make a different game. Yeah. And we're doing that already, because if you take chess, for instance, and you look at chess as a game, and then you say, well, we're going to incorporate a handicap for specific people. We're going to take away a few of the pawns to make it easier for that person. Then you're introducing a sort of a different game. It's a different game than the game you're playing. Yeah. And we do this constantly with computer games. We add specific difficulty choices. In the beginning, you're choosing, hey, I want to play this game on easy. And you could incorporate another game. If you see those difficulty sliders as different games, then you can add a different game that takes away specific challenges. You could, in theory, make the most easy option take away all of the challenges. And what you're left with then is, in essence, an AI that plays the game itself. Or you can view it as a long play video on YouTube of somebody playing the game. The player would still enjoy the story, still enjoy the intricacies of the puzzles and stuff, but it's solved for them. Yeah. That's an extreme example. Okay. It's not something I would advise to do.
But it is worth everybody here looking at their own game. Okay, what is the skill challenge that we're
how far am I willing to go in stripping away skill challenges?
You talked a little bit about subtitles, and it has become standard.
Yes.
Are there other standards, globally international standards that are good to be aware of?
Yeah, so they're the game accessibility guidelines.
Okay.
And they're international guidelines. They're also sort of open source in so far that people can give feedback on the game accessibility guidelines, and then they will change the guidelines if you have suggestions. And they also come with code examples. They even come with certain plugins for certain engines. If you're using a specific engine, then you can have that specific plugin that will solve this and this accessibility issue, and then you're conforming to one of those guidelines.
Great.
So the game accessibility guidelines, they're written in part by Ian Hamilton, which I greatly admire. I advise everybody that's interested in game accessibility to follow him on Twitter, Ian Hamilton, and he in part writes those guidelines and updates them.
This is maybe a good moment to move over to Paul. Mm-hmm. Those guidelines that Brian was talking about looks a little bit like what we just looked at here, which is your HiPerks, what your HiPerks Foundation does, only from the other side of the user.
Yeah, indeed. So there's actually, like I said, gaming is, I would say that quite some people love the game. However, I do know quite some young people that I found up at the revalidatie.
Rehabilitation.
Yes, thank you. And therefore, I find quite some young people, and a lot of them don't like to play games. They like when I can look at the games, but I can't play the games. And my personal ideas are some when things are like not possible. I really want to try, and that's also the reason why. And at last, I'm happy that I'm not the only one. That are lucky so many young people who have disability but do want to actually still play with a different ability. So like for me, I'm playing with left hand games. So there's only one from Raisin. Razor's the only one with a left-handed people with a mouse. And the only one with an MMO mouse, so that's the only one that I can use actually. And for me, I'm very happy, of course, but it would be nice if at some time, but everybody know that there are so many young people with a disability that they say, okay, I think it's right around 8% of all the gaming ages, from young to 40 years, something like that. 8% is quite a lot. So in the end, for business, it's also quite some money that they can get in that way for 8% of all the money. So and that way, I really hope that they see that more people want to use it that way, and they actually focus on also for people on the left-handed mouse, for example.
Your motivation is that you want the games to be as inclusive as possible. You want as many people to be able to play the game.
Yeah, because it takes quite some time before all the games or play with all disabilities are included in the game, and I'm not sure that's actually going to happen within 10 years or something. Yes, it's bigger and better at the same time, but not very standard at least, and that's the reason that we can wait before it's ready, but we can also use non-standard options and then show all the options, and that makes it easier to play those non-standard options instead of waiting before the games are how do you say it?
Made accessible.
Yeah, indeed. So
and when would you be happy? When is HiPerks a success?
The whole idea actually is that those kind of the young people, those guys, that they just have more chance for friends and more social work for those kind of people, those kind of young guys. Simply because a lot of them are just at home and just waiting, doing nothing, or just looking at Netflix, and that sometimes is nice, but not for a year in the rest of your life. So that you want to get extra funny things that you can do in your life.
Right.
So like gaming.
And maybe this is a bit of a weird question, but is there a big difference for you? The kind of games you played before and after?
No, actually, I can play the normal games. Actually, at first I tried at League of Legends. It's kind of easy with 4 abilities, or well, 6 actually, and you use most of the things you use a mouse, and for the abilities you might your like 6 abilities for your keyboard. And with the 12 abilities on your thumb, you get all the abilities in one hand. So in that way, you can play those games for one hand at least. And of course, there are so many different kind of abilities. But after that, I want to try other games like World of Warcraft. Also possible. A little harder to learn to try at first time, but ook that I can play every kind of champion that you can choose. And after that, I think a few weeks ago, I went to in Sweden for the DreamHack, and I went for some from friends, and in that fine moment, they really with like 10 people who want to go in there, and they really want to play. I think it's Killing Floor 2, and it's like food and zombie game, and you're just gonna shoot all the zombies, of course, and but I was like, it's not possible for me actually, kind of hard. There was an ability where you can use a not sure what it's called. It's the key. Yeah, it's a thing for your foot. You can put your foot on the thing. You can use for back, left, right, and you walk with your feet. With your foot, you can walk in that way.
It's simulated movement.
Yes, indeed. So it's kind of simple actually.
Did it simply map the WASD
Yes,
controls?
that's
Ah,
it.
right.
And so in that way, you can actually walk and shoot with your mouse. So that's normally you use that way with a keyboard, not with your feet. But the thing is, personally, I play a lot of CS, and you really want to shoot. And also going moment you're going to the QE now, the AND, left, right, looking what's coming up, and it's coming, then you're going to shoot. But that thing with your foot, you're going to the left, then you have to go to the mid, just stop, then to the right, and then stop, and it's not fast enough with your feet. So, and that game we were playing at Sweden, then I was just trying other options, and now I'm actually playing since a few weeks those FPS games with the thumb, and you're playing with you have like the 3 abilities with the first 3 and a 4 in the back, so 12 in the total. And you're going 1, 2, 3, and 1 is for left, or 2 is for front. And the 3 is for the right, and you go to 5 for walking back, and that's actually so simple, and it's actually working quite good actually.
So there's this one guideline in the game accessibility guidelines that simply asks for full custom control customization.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's one of the guidelines that helps you most of the time. Yeah. Cool.
Indeed. And like I said, I also was talking with Toby from Sweden. They also talking about the ID, and they also gave one of the camera thing where you can play with your eyes. Oh. It's really great to just only playing like Hearthstone.
Oh, right.
But, from Blizzard. You're just playing the game with your eyes only. And it's so great, and that those kind of people they only can use their eyes, and it's so yeah.
Yeah, even Stephen Hawking should play Hearthstone.
Yes.
Yeah.
Awesome. And also like what's the other game? World of Tank. Yeah. World of Tank is also possible like that. It's not too fast. It's kind of and also for those kind of people, everybody would a little like golf. Everybody get a handicap per points.
Okay.
That's a little.
So you can
idea.
Compete.
Yes, and that's a total idea that everybody's after the right real play together.
So going back to Brian, I've heard here are some. You mentioned some software solutions. Here are hardware solutions.
Yes.
So you can tackle the accessibility problem from different angles, right?
Yeah. So the hardware solution is mostly something that the user is doing to go meet the game halfway, and the game can then meet the user halfway with their particular hardware solutions. And one of the very important things is to make your controls completely customizable. Well, one of the quality assurance rules of the consoles was so that you could only have certain layouts of controls. They didn't agree with the fact that you could customize all of the buttons, and they're slowly coming back from that specifically for game accessibility. Yeah. Or that's one of the reasons why they're doing that.
The one way to look at it is, how are we going to solve it? Software, hardware, or whatever, user or a developer. And you can also look at when are we going to solve it. So do we create a game and let's see if it's accessible? Let's have Paul over and playtest, or do we think about it beforehand?
Yeah. So this is This is the same with website accessibility. If we see that a company makes a website accessible at the very end, so that they make the website, then they say, oh shit, we needed to make it accessible for people with disabilities. And then they hire us, they test it with people with disabilities. Well, surprise, surprise, it isn't accessible. And then they start to fix things. Then it's very expensive. And it's usually not worth the money from a commercial standpoint, but then they're forced to do it because they're the government and they have to be accessible for people with disabilities. And then we see that it's like 50% extra budget that's needed to make it accessible. If by contrast they incorporate it from the very beginning and they just have it in the back of their minds while they're designing the game and they're thinking about what sort of skill challenges am I actually putting in the game, and then make sure that the rest is as accessible as possible, then it's a lot more, it's a lot cheaper. So it's mostly an economic standpoint. You're not just getting a more accessible game, you're also making that accessibility cheaper. And the users that don't have any form of disabilities are still going to use those features in some creative way. Gamers are creative. And they will see it as a higher quality game because of it. So one of the things is we had Blind Doom. It's a mod for Doom that makes Doom completely accessible for blind people. They add additional audio cues so they can hear the enemies around them and they can hear the walls around them. And it's really cool to see people that are completely blind play Doom. But then they went one step further and they made all of those sounds in character. As in, first the walls sounded like just they had a specific audio cue for this is a wall, this is a wall. But then they started to add like in the levels in hell, it's always like this fire that you're hearing in the back of your head, like and in the space levels, spaceship levels, it's always like this droning of a computer at the background, or the fan of some device, and then the experience was also better for non-handicapped users because there were simply so much more of an audio experience around them while they were playing Doom. If you recall the multi-user dungeons, the MUDs from old, the completely text-based multiplayer things, there's a lot of multi-user dungeon engines out there that have been modded in such a way that they are supportive for text-to-speech software that the blind users can use. Blind users, if any blind users are watching this, go play multi-user dungeons. They're still being played by quite active communities, and there's quite a bit of blind gamers out there that play those.
A different way to tackle this problem that we talked about is representation. It's not just about making it accessible, playable, but it's also about representation. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So one of the things Paul talked about is that games are a social lubricant. They make sure people talk to each other, teams are formed, people play with each other in competitive or co-op modes, and one of the cool things is if you have an avatar that you can that feels like yourself within the game, then that can help such social lubricants. On the flip side, sometimes people want to play non-handicapped characters because they want to forget about their handicap for a bit. But then just seeing other handicapped people walking around, for instance, if you walk through GTA and you would find people in wheelchairs on the street, that would still feel both a more lively world, and it would also help just the awareness of other gamers. Hey, there are handicapped people in the world, and
yeah, exactly.
They exist.
And Paul? What's your view on representation?
Well, to about this thing is there are so many people with a disability, and most of those people you don't know them. You see them because they're not at the standard place. And also, like I said, gaming is a real it's a another world actually. So you're going to play, you're gaming, you're playing at another world, and in that world, everybody is the same. You know, actually with that champion at least, and it doesn't matter if you're disabled or not. Everybody playing champion. So that's it's for those people. It's more like you feel you're not feeling like disabled. Like you're playing.
You're leveling the playing field.
Yes, yes, and that's the whole thing. So that would actually that would be the whole idea, to get those people first. That more people see it, that there are so many players actually with disability, and there are so many abilities for those guys to find new games and new options for other platform worlds, get a new world in there for these kind of young people.
Well, one more point about representation. I don't want to sound like some sort of Anita Sarkeesian person. I'm not entirely sure about the audience here, how well that would fall. But representation is important for people. But also on a more realistic scale, if you have, for instance, a hero that saves the world, and that person is in a wheelchair and shooting aliens, that would be sort of weird. It would fit in some cartoony forms of games, but most of the time you would simply want realistic representation, and the people. It's simply strange that the people are completely absent from the world. Like if, for instance, you're walking around in GTA and you have no people at all with wheelchairs, while the rest of the game feels really vibrant. That feels weird for certain people. And I want to beat up people in wheelchairs and steal their cars. And it's not
steal their wheelchair.
steal their wheelchairs and then beat them up with a wheelchair. I mean that wouldn't be a positive form of representation, but it would still be representation, and I think that would be a positive step forward.
Grand Theft wheelchair.
Yeah.
Okay, that sounds really good.
And I'm pretty sure that those kind of people are most of the laughing that those.
Yeah, they would like that.
That's the whole thing.
Yeah, that sounds awesome.
But also that's also the thing that for my total idea is actually for getting more that game is normal. For example, like a LAN party when you start like a tournoi together versus together and this kind of games. And in the end, it's like, para esport. That's my whole idea that I want to play with the whole foundation.
Okay.
There's so much esports going. I know the one who's the ESL for Benelux.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of our friends, and he's that world is getting bigger.
But yeah.
And that world is getting so awesome and so much cooler. Then at some time they don't have to, they focus them for the new esport world. But I'm so sure that there are so many young people with a disability. They also want to play versus others with the same level instead of the best esport is too much better. Yeah, there was also possible like for LOL. Let's take that one. Like 5 people in your team. You say 1 people without disability, 1 with one hand, 1 with like those kind of teams. It's possible as well. But it's also in that time. It's also important that you have to work together. That's the whole thing in most games. First, you got to play a person, but also you got to work together, and that's the whole idea. Those kind of fights. So that's also an option.
All right. Well, that's it for today's incubation Q&A about accessibility. I would like to thank Paul van der Made and Brian Bors very much. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, they do well.